All right, Mr. Albee.
Microphones.
Oh, what?
They're not on there.
Arm the mics, would you?
Dr. Mainland, I think we left off, you were reviewing the autopsy report to see if there's any indication of urine or feces or anything else in the bed or in her clothes.
That's correct.
And was there any indication of that?
There was none described.
And that's typically something that would be put in an autopsy report, correct?
At least I would, with regard to the clothing.
You've looked at police investigative reports in this case, and you didn't see any indication in any of those reports about anything being found in the bed either, right?
No, I don't think so.
Does the fact that there is no evidence that she had gone to the bathroom in the bed indicate that she'd been able to get up and go to the bathroom?
I can't tell. There are too many variables there. Somebody could have helped her. Somebody could have, brought her a bedpan. Somebody could have changed the bedclothes. Too many variables. So
But you have no evidence of there being a bedpan in the Jensen home, right?
No.
The police conducted a thorough search of the home, right?
They conducted a search. I'm assuming it was thorough.
Is there any reason you have for believing it wasn't thorough?
No, I'm not a cop, so.
And there was no vomit in the bed.
No.
Dr. Lavin, at the, Dr. Lavin, I'm sorry, Dr. Mainland.
Oh my God. He calls me Bob's F all the time. So.
At the last hearing, you indicated that there was no hard evidence that this was a death for an asphyxia death from strangulation or suffocation, right?
I did.
Your opinion was that this was an ethylene glycol poisoning death?
Yes.
You based your opinion that this was an ethylene glycol poisoning death based on the amounts of ethylene glycol found in Julie Jensen's body, right?
I would have to say so, yes.
And you've learned nothing new about this case.
Did you want to finish on?
Yeah, I just remembered something.
Go ahead.
Not only the amounts of ethylene glycol found, but the oxalic acid crystals in the kidneys. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. And let me, in fact, I'm glad you reminded me. The oxalic acid crystals, those can last for weeks in the system, right?
Yes.
The presence of oxalic acid crystals in Julie Jensen's kidneys would be consistent with a single consumption of ethylene glycol around midnight on December 2nd and passing away 38 hours later.
In and of itself, yes.
You acknowledged at the last hearing that you were unable to prove that this was asphyxia,
Yes.
and your opinion was that it was not asphyxia as cause of death. True?
My opinion was that it couldn't be ruled out. I don't know that I ever said there was absolutely no chance that there could be asphyxia.
I don't think that was my question.
All right.
I think what I asked
Sorry.
is whether your opinion was that it was not asphyxia as cause of death.
My opinion was that the cause of death was ethylene glycol poisoning. We did discuss asphyxia, and I believe I said that I couldn't rule it out or in.
That's right. So your opinion, you didn't have an opinion that it was an asphyxia death at the time of your testimony in August, correct?
Well, I had an opinion.
That it was not asphyxia, that it was ethylene glycol.
I had opinion that my opinion was that asphyxia could not be ruled out. But, as far as the official cause of death, ethylene glycol poisoning.
And you've learned nothing since that time to cause you to believe that Julie Jensen could not have died from ethylene glycol, correct?
No.
Right, I mean, that could still be your cause of death. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
And the reason for your change of heart to say this is an asphyxia death is the statements you read from Aaron Dillard.
Yes.
Without Aaron Dillard, you don't change your cause of death in this case.
Probably not.
So the question becomes whether Aaron Dillard should be believed, right?
I guess so.
Do you have the autopsy report from
Yes.
Dr. Shambliss in front of you?
I do.
And could you please tell me what the exhibit number is on that?
S7?
And at the last hearing, you testified that there was no doubt in your mind that Julie Jensen received a lethal amount of ethylene glycol and died of that.
I did.
But now you have doubt as to whether she died from ethylene glycol?
I believe she was, if I believe Aaron Dillard, then I would say that, I can't answer that simply, all right? I can't answer that simply. I think she was on death's door from ethylene glycol poisoning. And I think had she been left alone, she would have died of ethylene glycol poisoning. But I believe that her death was hastened.
Based on Aaron Dillard.
Yes.
Could you tell me what a postmortem artifact is?
There are things that, after death, things that occur, changes that occur in the body that may look like something ominous perhaps, but aren't.
That is, sometimes you'll see some, do you call them sign or symptom or observation? What do you call something like seeing petechia in the lungs? What would be the term?
Wait a minute, what would I
mean, is that a...
Is that a sign?
Certainly, when you see petechia in the lungs, for example, you consider what the cause of that might be. Fair to say?
Right.
And I'm just wondering what you refer to those kind of observations as. Signs, symptoms, observations? Do you?
Symptoms only occur in live people.
That's what I figured, yeah.
Signs, observations, you can use either word, I don't care.
Okay. And one of the things that you looked at based on this autopsy protocol was some hemorrhages in the neck area.
Yes.
Which inexplicably are within the section of the autopsy protocol for gastrointestinal system. Is that right?
I think I can explain why, but yes, that's good enough.
And there it says there's a hemorrhage of the mucosa of the hypopharyngeal muscles on the upper back of the thyroid, cartilage of the larynx near the epiglottic folds, true?
Area epiglottic?
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
And as you were describing, that's the area sort of if you looked in the mirror at your throat, it's sort of just below where you can see in the back of the throat or neck.
Very good.
Is that
Yes.
Is that accurate? And it's your opinion that those kind of hemorrhages in the neck may or may not be suspicious, true?
Correct.
That would be something that oftentimes may be what you call a post-mortem artifact, correct?
Yes.
And that is, those could happen just as part of the dying process?
Yes.
You could have those hemorrhages in the neck?
Yes.
It doesn't mean that the person was struck at some point, right?
Not necessarily.
I mean, you could get those from being struck, or you could just have them as a result of dying.
Correct.
You could die of a heart attack and get that.
Yes.
And then another thing noted in Dr. Chambliss's report is that there's petechiae over the lower lobe and left lung, the left side of the pericardial sac, the front and back of the heart, and the top of the leaflet of the diaphragm. Is that right?
Okay, can you tell me what page that's on? I remember reading it, but, oh, I see it. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, and what page is that? What page is that?
Page 3.
And those kind of observations about petechiae in the lungs and pericardial sac around the heart, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And those observations of petechiae in those areas don't really tell you anything, right?
Not really.
That's a pretty common finding.
I won't say it's, well, I don't know how common, but it's common enough that, we can see it in many different causes of death.
It doesn't mean that there's been some trauma, right?
Not necessarily.
And again, somebody could have a heart attack and have that kind of petechiae in the lungs or pericardial sac.
Yes.
Right? The larynx cartilage, what's in the larynx is in the neck area?
Yeah, the larynx is the voice box.
And there was no evidence of damage there, correct?
None was described, no.
And that's something you might see in a suffocation kind of death?
I wouldn't say that damage to the larynx is typical in suffocation. I would expect it in I would say it's more possible in strangulation. There's a difference.
Or if there's some pressure on the neck?
Yes.
And there isn't any evidence of that kind of damage to the cartilage in this case?
No.
Then you noted, and I think it's the photograph that we saw, that there's a small amount of soft tissue hemorrhage adjacent to the ribs in the left upper chest wall, correct?
Correct.
And that also is rather nonspecific, correct?
Correct. If you take it out of context, if you take any of this stuff out of context, it's non-specific.
I mean, that could be due to some injury she had before she died, right?
It could.
I mean, it could be from the kids jumping on her on the bed and catching her with a knee, right?
I hope not, but yeah, it could.
I mean, that is the kind of thing that could cause this sort of small hemorrhage, right?
Well, it's kind of a weird place for a kid jumping on the bed to land. But, I mean, it's fair to say, I know what you're getting at. These hemorrhages are not specific for any one thing.
Could have happened when the body was moved, right?
Possibly.
I mean, all these other injuries I've talked about too, like the petechiae in the lungs and the pericardial sac. I mean, those are kinds of things that could happen when the body was moved as well, right?
Well, not so much the petechiae, but, you know, it's possible to cause bruising post-mortem or perimortem.
Perimortem meaning right around death?
Yes.
And so that could mean either when emergency medical personnel move the body to try to give some medical care, or when they move the body to take it for examination for autopsy, right?
Yeah, it's possible. You know, it's possible.
And it's not uncommon.
I wouldn't say that.
It falls within the area of potential postmortem artifacts that may appear to be something, and it's actually not. There's an innocent explanation, right?
Are you talking about hemorrhages on the chest wall?
Yes.
Yeah, if you talk generally about postmortem artifact, I mean, you see them most commonly in cases where there's been resuscitation, if you're talking about postmortem artifact.
Okay. But again, this is a non-specific injury that could be caused the same way you'd get any kind of bruise when you're living, right?
It's non-specific. You've got to interpret it, you know, you've got to interpret it in context. So out of context, yes, it's non-specific.
And if Mrs. Jensen was having difficulty walking because she was in a somewhat intoxicated state due to ethylene glycol, this could be from her falling into something as well, true?
It's possible.
Similarly, the bruise on her buttocks, that could easily be from running into a table, for example, right?
It's possible.
That would be, it's in the area where you might get a bruise from running into a table.
It's possible.
And even Aaron Dillard's story didn't talk about anything, any pressure being put on the buttocks, right?
Oh, not directly. I mean, he didn't describe that directly. He just described somebody sitting on top of Mrs. Jensen.
And that kind of bruise on the buttocks would be very nonspecific, true?
It's relatively nonspecific.
Likewise with the bruise on the shin, right?
That, I would say, is very nonspecific.
There's probably somebody in this room with a bruise on their shin right now.
Yeah, probably me.
You mentioned that the autopsy protocol refers to some sort of curved mark in the neck area.
Yes.
That may or may not be a fingernail, correct?
Correct.
That could easily be due to moving the body, for example.
It's possible.
There's nothing specific about that injury.
No, not taken alone, no.
We had testimony yesterday from Officer Riley, who said that when he arrived on the scene, Julie Jensen's eyes were open, and it looked a little bit like it was bulging out. Did you find anything suspicious about that?
Bulging?
I thought he said that it looked a little bulged out.
I don't think they were bulging.
Okay. I mean, and he acknowledged he's not a doctor. It was something that he noted. You looked at the photographs of Mrs. Jensen in her bed, correct?
Yes.
And there was nothing about the eyes that caused you any concern, correct?
Well, there were some changes in the eyes that, you know, had to be looked at a little more closely, but in my opinion, they were post-mortem artifacts.
And a common post-mortem drying of the eyes is tache noire?
Yes.
Okay, and that's something you see fairly regularly?
Yes.
The autopsy protocol says nothing about any damage to the nose, correct?
I don't recall so.
In fact, it says the nose is midline, right?
I'm sorry. Yes, it does.
And Dr. Chambliss noted absolutely nothing significant about the nose at the time of autopsy, true?
No, there's nothing in his report.
By the way, it appears from the autopsy that Detective Ratsberg took photographs.
I don't know who took the photos.
I invite your attention to the first page,
Oh,
right
yeah,
above personal effects.
I see it.
Now, when you do an autopsy, do you usually take photographs yourself?
I do.
And the reason for that is?
I know what I'm looking at, and I know what I want the picture to be of. And I know that if I'm taking the picture, I'm going to see what I want to see in the picture. Sometimes lay people don't understand the lesions that, that we're looking at. So my policy is police can take all the pictures they want, but either I or my assistant will take autopsy photos.
And it appears that Dr. Chambliss did not take his own photos in this case.
If he did, I've never seen him.
Are you also concerned about the potential for photographs to be somewhat misleading if based on lighting and things like that it looks like there may be something there that's not, or?
I object to the form of the question, Your Honor, in that he indicates, are you also concerned about something? She's not expressed any concerns about anything at this juncture. Thus, the question assumes that...
You can't conjunctive. Rephrase it.
Do you have concerns about not taking your own photos because those photos may reflect something or appear to reflect something that's not really there?
Yes.
When you take photographs during an autopsy, do you take photographs of the body before you make incisions?
Yes.
And why is that?
To document the state of the body and any external injuries.
Were any such photographs taken at the time of autopsy in this case?
I have not seen any.
You did, prior to testifying in August, have all the photographs from the scene available to you, correct?
To my knowledge, yes.
You had reviewed those photographs?
Yes.
You had seen those photographs of Julie Jensen in the bed before?
Yes.
And you also had reviewed the autopsy photos that do exist, correct?
Yes.
Based on your review of those photographs, or there was nothing about your review of those photographs, both at the scene and at the autopsy, that caused you to find that the cause of death was asphyxia, correct?
Correct. I have to expand on that though, if you don't mind. I was concerned about it, but there was nothing definitive.
And there wasn't enough there that caused you to say that this was a cause of death, correct?
Correct.
Your testimony at the last hearing was, I can't prove it, true?
Yes.
And that there was no hard evidence for suffocation.
Yes.
And that was even though you had seen this photograph of the nose, correct?
Yes.
Were you aware that the body had been moved prior to the time photographs had been taken?
I know that EMS was there and assessed. I think they assessed her and determined that she was deceased.
You noted in the photographs that Mrs. Jensen had EKG pads.
Yes.
You noted in the materials you reviewed that she had 2 pads up in the clavicle area on each side of her body.
Can't remember. Do you have a diagram? I don't have a diagram.
You don't have that in your materials? That's what I was just pulling out, though. Dr. Mainland, I'm going to show you Defendant's Exhibit 218. Do you recognize that as a diagram that was prepared in this case?
Yes.
Who would prepare that diagram?
It would either be, well, it probably was either Roger Johnson or Barb Rossman.
Who are Roger Johnson and Barbara Rossman?
They were deputy medical examiners at the time.
What does the deputy medical examiner do?
Investigate deaths.
Are they physicians?
No. Not necessarily.
Okay.
These two aren't.
They are not physicians. I'd move Defendant's Exhibit 218.
The objection.
No objection.
Received.
Let me just display this on the screen, Doctor. I guess it's a little, I don't know, maybe you can read what's on there. But can you see the defibrillator pads?
Yes.
And those are up in the clavicle area on both sides?
Yes, and I want to just point out that I don't think they're defibrillator pads.
Okay, they're EKG
Yes.
pads, which are something different.
Yes.
All right. So that looks like that's just a mistake on this diagram.
Yes.
And could you, with a pointer, if you have it, just show where those are? Okay. And then there was one lower EKG pad, correct? All right.
If I'm reading it right. Yeah.
And those would require some movement of the body to place those?
A little.
And we had some testimony from Mr. Wilkinson, who was a first responder, who indicated that he believed he had rolled over the body to place those pads.
Okay.
And the movement of the body to place those pads and then the rolling of the body back to its position, that could be another explanation for the arm being in the position it's in?
I doubt it.
Were you there?
No, I wasn't.
Do you know how Mr. Wilkinson or any of the other first responders handled the body?
No, I don't. You know what? And I want to just retract that because I answered your question wrong. I thought you were going to ask me about the hemorrhages underneath. And that's what I said. I doubt it. But the arm could have been moved. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That is, the arm could end up underneath her as depicted in that photograph as a result of the movement by the firefighters or whoever responded.
It's possible.
Whatever happened with the nose, there was not such damage as for it to be displayed to Dr. Chambliss the next day?
I don't know what he saw. All I know is what he wrote, and he didn't describe any.
It's hard for you to imagine if the nose looked like that the next day that he would not have noted that, correct?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
That wouldn't be a significant finding to be noted on an autopsy report?
Not necessarily.
Would you note that on an autopsy report, Dr. Mainland?
Probably.
You absolutely would, wouldn't you?
I probably would.
This Exhibit 218, the diagram, there's no indication of any problems with the nose, correct?
No.
If the first responders turned the body over so that the nose was crunched in the pillow, that could account for some changes in the nose?
I kind of doubt that because It was a pretty short time that
Well,
the body
how-
was,
How long was it between the time photographs were taken and the time Mr. Wilkinson turned that body back over?
I'm thinking it was maybe an hour
How do you know that?
from reading police reports and when Roger Jensen pronounced the death.
What time were the photographs taken?
Sometime before, honestly, I can't tell you. Sometime before the body was moved.
And you can't tell me at this moment when exactly that was, true?
No.
If someone was smothered in a pillow, one thing that you might see is some sort of fluid in that pillow, correct?
You might.
And there was no evidence in this case of any fluid in any of the pillows in the Jensen home, true?
I didn't see any documentation of it.
There's no documentation of any nostril abrasions, correct?
No.
And if someone was very weak in bed and you turn them from their back onto their stomach, there's a potential for causing bruising to the arms as they were turned over, correct?
You'd have to be pretty rough.
Well, if somebody is not mobile, it takes some pressure on the arms to turn the body over, correct?
Yeah, I still think you'd have to be kind of rough.
You see that with bedridden hospital patients that they
Yeah,
may have,
You see it on their arms.
correct?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm asking about.
Okay.
Would you might expect to see those kind of bruises if somebody was turned like that, right?
You could.
Sometimes in suffocation deaths, you'll see signs of teeth marks in the lips.
Yes.
There's no evidence of that kind of thing here, right?
No.
There's no evidence in this case of forced food consumption, correct?
I can't prove or disprove that.
Well, you have no evidence of it happening, right?
I can't say anything either way. You know, it depends on the time frame in which you're talking and a whole bunch of other things. But if just looking at the autopsy report,
There was over 20 ounces of liquid in Julie Jensen's stomach at the time of death.
something like that.
Based on what she testified earlier, I would suggest that she'd recently drank that.
It would suggest it.
Your opinion that, well, your decision to rely on Aaron Dillard stems from your belief that he did not have any other source for his information. Is that right?
Yes.
That is, it's your belief that Aaron Dillard would have no way of knowing that there was petechiae in the lungs, for example, correct?
I don't think he ever said anything about petechiae in the lungs.
Okay, 139. 139. Let me. It's around here. Of course, it's not. Here it is. This one right here. Damn. Let me show you Defendant's Exhibit 139, a typewritten statement of Aaron Dillard's. I invite your attention to the bottom of the second paragraph. And there's an indication that Aaron Dillard claimed that Mark Jensen told him that he pushed on her lungs, correct?
Yes.
And that might be the kind of story that someone would create if they realized there was some damage in the lung or rib area, correct?
It's possible.
If you were trying to concoct a consistent story, true?
It's possible.
It's your belief that Aaron Dillard would have no reason to believe that the body had been turned over, right?
I don't know what Aaron Dillard, I don't know what he knew about, what happens when somebody dies and the scene is investigated.
Well, is one of the things that you're relying on is that Aaron Dillard would have no way of knowing that there was some pushing of the nose?
I would say that I'm relying on that to a pretty minor degree.
Well, what is it that Aaron Dillard had to say that causes you to want to believe him, even though you know he's a lifetime con man?
He talks about medications that Mrs. Jensen was allegedly taking, and I don't think he could have known that from anywhere else.
Well, let me just take that one up. If Mark Jensen told Aaron Dillard that his wife was taking several medications and described those medications, that would not be a confession to her murder, fair to say?
Fair.
Okay, so what is it about the circumstances of this alleged confession that Aaron Dillard provides that causes you to want to credit a lifetime con man?
Everything in his description is consistent with the autopsy findings and the toxicology.
Well, the toxicology was well known that Mrs. Jensen died due to antifreeze, correct?
It was public knowledge.
And Aaron Dillard, in fact, says that the last dose of antifreeze was on Wednesday, right?
I think he did. Let me see. Yeah, that's the last time he mentions it.
And that would not be consistent with your theory because you believe there had to have been a dose on Thursday, December 3rd, right?
I think I said I favored that.
That's what you've testified to in this case, is that there had to be a dose very close in time to her death, correct?
Yes.
Because it's your position that it would only stay in the stomach for an hour or two, right?
I think I said longer than that.
But certainly not all the way back to the previous day if she died at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right?
I would doubt that it would be there that long.
Or are you now saying that if on the early evening of December 2nd, she drank antifreeze, that it would still be in her stomach the following day?
Only if she drank a lot of it.
It's been your opinion all along that she drank the antifreeze, that she took a final dose on that day, isn't it, Dr. Mainland?
I said that I think I testified that the best explanation for the antifreeze in Mrs. Jensen's stomach at the time of her death was her having consumed or been given it on the day of her death.
Does that remain your position?
Yes.
And that would be inconsistent with what Aaron Dillard has to say about consumption of antifreeze, wouldn't it?
He doesn't mention it.
It would be
So I guess I would have to say it's inconsistent if he doesn't mention it.
That's right, it would be inconsistent, right? True?
It might just be incomplete.
Well, that is, if you really want to have to believe Aaron Dillard's statement, then you could make find some reason to accept it. But in terms of what Aaron Dillard said, it's inconsistent. True?
Objection, Your Honor. First of all, that's only part of what Aaron Dillard has said. There are two statements. She's looking at one statement, which was actually a summary somebody else prepared of his actual statement. So if we're talking about omissions, I
Well,
think
the second thing is that consistency, and I think the doctor has alluded to this, it could just be incomplete. If I tell you there was an accident down on the corner and it involved a Chevy and a Pontiac, and you ask me later, why didn't you say it was a red Pontiac? I just left it out. It's not inconsistent. I think that's what the doctor was trying to say.
Thank you, Judge. You took the words right out of my mouth.
So I have to ask you to rephrase your question.
Well, she already testified at one point that it was inconsistent.
Well, ask a question.
What is it about Aaron Dillard's story about suffocation that tells you that the only way he could have come up with that information is if Mark Jensen confessed to him?
Because of the knowledge of the medications that Mrs. Jensen was taking.
Well, let me, again, I'm sorry, but...
Excuse me.
I'm trying to-
Objection.
Just a minute. Finish your answer, doctor.
Okay. There are a number of things. The knowledge of the specific medications that Mrs. Jensen was taking, the levels of those medications in her blood, in her stomach contents, the levels of ethylene glycol in her blood and in her stomach contents, and the symptoms that he was describing. The whole picture fits.
Could I have the last question read back, please?
Question, what is it about Aaron Dillard's story about suffocation that tells you that the only way he could have come up with that information is if Mark Jensen confessed to him?
About suffocation?
Yes, it was
Oh, I didn't hear
restricted.
that part.
And that's why I tried to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for being,
No, I mean, that's fine. That's why I tried to stop you early on in that question. So what is it about the suffocation aspect?
that in and of itself, there's really nothing. It's just, what I'm doing is I'm looking at the other facts and I'm saying, well, okay, I believe these, so I have no reason not to believe this.
Well, but you understand how a man in jail could protest his innocence and tell the story of how his wife was taking certain medications and tell the story of how he's been charged with poisoning her with antifreeze, and that a con man could take those facts and then add a confession portion to it. You can see how that could happen?
Certainly it could happen.
And so I'm asking you if there's anything about Aaron Dillard's claim of suffocation that could not have been concocted by Aaron Dillard.
No, he certainly could have concocted that. I mean, I'm not saying that he did, but I'm saying it's a possibility.
Dr. Mainland, you're aware that the majority of people who commit suicide are suffering from depression?
I would say that that's a fair statement.
One thing that you might look at in determining whether a cause of death is suicide or homicide is whether somebody's been treated for depression, correct?
Yes.
You might look to see if they had a past history of being treated for depression, correct?
Yes,
You might consider whether they're being medicated for depression, true?
yes,
Weight loss is one symptom of depression.
yes,
The Kenosha County's suicide rate is higher than Wisconsin's average,
the last time I looked, it still was, yes.
and its suicide rate of 30 to 50-year-olds is also higher than average, true?
I think that's where we see most of them. I don't know about the rate, but that's where we see the majority of our suicides.
That is most, there's a larger percentage of people in the 30 to 50 age range that commit suicide in Kenosha County than any other age range.
It's irrelevant.
That's the largest age group that we see suicides in, yes.
There remains a stigma about depression,
I believe so.
and because of that stigma, oftentimes people try to conceal their depression from others.
Yes,
Friends and family often don't know the extent of a person's depression,
yes,
and that's probably one reason why there are so many suicides, is people don't know to intervene, true?
Objection assumes the existence of a fact, not an evidence, to wit, that there are a lot of suicides.
Well, the objection's overruled.
now you're gonna have to read it back or repeat it.
That's one reason why there are so many suicides, is people don't know to intervene because the individuals concealed their depression.
Yeah, I think that's a factor. I don't know how big a factor it is, but certainly.
Did you speak with Dr. Chambliss in this case?
No,
Not at any time?
no.
Are you able to predict with any degree of certainty Julie Jensen's motor and cognitive function on the morning of December 3rd?
I think it would have been pretty poor.
Do you have medical reason for that?
Yes, because she was acidotic and ill from being poisoned with ethylene glycol.
But there are certainly variations in how ill you might be from ethylene glycol depending on amounts, how long it's been, those kind of things, correct?
Yes,
And we don't know how much ethylene glycol Julie Jensen consumed. True.
no, we don't.
These, the slide photos of the kidney tissues that we looked at, those photographs were taken by Dr. Lavin.
Yes,
Did you look at the same slide tissues that she photographed?
yes,
You didn't create your own tissue samples?
I did.
All right, maybe we're talking past each other, or maybe you did two different things. To make photographs of kidney tissue, you first prepare a kidney slide, right?
Yes,
And Dr. Lavin did that, correct?
yes,
You also did that?
yes,
You looked at both the slides prepared by, the tissue slides prepared by Dr. Lavin and your own tissue
Yes.
slides. Is what you saw from both tissue slides identical?
it's very similar.
Were the photographs that you saw identical to the tissue slides that Dr. Lavin prepared?
Very similar, and I'm saying they're not identical because they're not the same exact slice of tissue, but they're very similar.
Well, so you've never seen the tissue samples that correspond with those photographs we saw?
Yes, I have,
Okay.
on the slides.
On the tissue slides?
Yes,
But those are slides cut by Dr. Lavin,
no,
prepared
they
by
weren't, they were cut by a lab.
Did Dr. Lavin have any role in the preparation of that slide?
Well, I know what she testified to in the preliminary hearing, and it's the same thing that I do, so I can describe that if you like.
That's fine.
Okay. How do you go from an organ at autopsy to getting tissue on?
Let me ask you how you prepare the tissue slide. Let me do that.
Okay. At autopsy, it's typical for a forensic pathologist to take samples, little pieces, of all the major organs in the body. And we put them into a jar of preservative called formalin. And then some people, this is how I do it. We put them into a jar of formalin. And then later, when it's convenient, I take these pieces of tissue. I take what I perceive to be the areas of interest. I cut them into smaller pieces, and I should have brought one. I put them into these little containers called cassettes. They're about the size of a postage stamp and about as thick as a nickel. And so those get sent in preservative to a laboratory. They get processed through a machine so that the tissue, when it comes out of processing, it's embedded in paraffin wax. Then a histotechnologist takes that block of tissue in paraffin, cuts it on a microtome, which is just, a machine that cuts things really thin, and floats it onto a slide. Then the slide is stained and cover slipped and labeled and sent back to me.
All right. And let's get back, I guess, to my original question. The only photographs are taken by Dr. Lavin, and you were not able to you didn't view any tissue samples that you thought were identical to those photographs.
I should have just said they were identical. They were the same. They were not the same 5 millimeter thickness or 5 micrometer thickness piece of tissue, but I don't have any doubt that they were from the same block of tissue that Dr. Lavin looked at or prepared or had prepared.
But you don't have personal knowledge that it was. You're relying on what Dr. Lavin's notes or something had to tell you about this subject. Is that right?
Personal knowledge that what was what? I forget.
Regarding the tissue slides and the photographs, you do have personal knowledge?
Of what?
That the photographs that you looked at were the same tissue slides you looked at.
I have Dr. Lavin's testimony, and I obviously didn't watch Dr. Lavin take the pictures. I looked at the pictures, I looked at what was under the microscope, and they look very similar, and I really don't have a doubt that those were pictures of those slides.
Okay. I think I got it now, thank you. And without Aaron Dillard, you still would not be able to prove suffocation in your view, correct?
Well, I don't think that, you mean for medical purposes?
Right, well, I'll back up. At the time of the hearing in August, you said you could not prove it was suffocation, correct?
Correct.
And the only new information you have is Aaron Dillard, true?
Yes.
And so without Aaron Dillard, you would feel like you could not prove it sufficiently to render an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty.
Without Aaron Dillard or some other person that heard a confession.
Okay, but Aaron Dillard's the person you're relying on in this case.
Correct.
Thank you, Dr. Mainland.
May I redirect?
Yeah, there will be, and Your Honor, it's going to be quite a bit lengthier than 10 minutes.
All right. Let's break then until Monday at 8:55. Is there a problem, Doctor?
No.
If there is, I'm sure we can reschedule to a different day.
No, I'd rather be here than in my office on a Monday morning.
I would too. I definitely don't want to be in your office. But let's not talk about the case over the weekend, nor listen to anyone else talk about it. And of course, don't read, watch, or listen to any account of the trial. And as I've said several times, that your going home at night is dependent upon your compliance with that rule. So anything else? Thank you and have a great weekend, folks.